Your depth on your fantasy football roster is going to be seriously tested this week. Week 7 is a put up or shut up week, literally. Welcome as always to the Fantasy Football Stock Report. Chris Pearson here with you as always for the Week 7 preview edition for your team, your league, your game, your home. You know where it's at to get good fantasy advice, even from a team that's struggling. Another tough loss for me last week, but my team is improving point-wise. So yes, we are what we are. We're 1-5 at the moment, but we only lost 103-100. It was a tight game. It was down to the wire all week long. Again, my players are looking better every single week. Had to make a few more moves this week to get some better players that were out there on the wire, some guys that I weren't proud of, that had not consistently produced well, to drop. But hopefully now going forward with a much easier schedule for me coming up. Suffice it to say, I'm in a pretty weak league. With our team, a pretty weak league. There's only like one team at 6-0, and after that, a couple at 4-2, and then the rest are 3-3 or below. So actually, this is not a this is a pretty easy opportunity potentially for a turnaround. And I've turned around teams before, so no matter where you are at, again, I always say it, whether you're sitting at 6-0 or 0-6 or even in the middle at 3-3, you can make a playoff push. Or at least a push toward, and getting to the postseason and turn your ship around. So I turned around a 1-4 team and took it to the playoffs. So it can be done if you find the right gems on the wire, if you make the right moves. I want to, of course, thank my awesome co-owners, Nate and Matt, for being on the show last week. Again, we had a barrel of fun last week. It was just awesome. It's always crazy when they do be a part of this and we can discuss players together and matchups together. Just a fun time. So I thank them for that, and I thank them for sticking by me through this whole tough season. This has been the hardest season for me personally as an owner in my 11 years of playing, or no 10. It's 10th year. My 10th year now playing fantasy football. This has been the most trying season because our draft picks just did not pan out. C.J. Anderson, Melvin Gordon, Amir Abdullah, they were all at running back. Running back is my weakest point of position. I'm good at quarterback. I'm good at wide receiver. I have four of the best wide receivers in the league. I have an awesome tight end, Tyler Eifert. I have a great kicker in Justin Tucker. I have two strong defenses. But running backs just have not panned out. Those three were my original draft pick. C.J. Anderson with my first round. Then I got Melvin Gordon like in round 4. And Amir Abdullah like in round 9 before he broke out in the preseason. But all those guys have been disappointments. Anderson has not been producing. And Gordon, Abdullah are in the fumbling doghouse. So they're losing opportunities to produce not only for their teams but for their fantasy owners. So at this point, unless you really have room on your roster, on your bench, and you want to potentially hold out hope that they're going to break through, all three of those guys are droppable in at least standard leagues. Maybe definitely in 10-team and 12-team. Maybe not as much in 14-team, but those three guys are for sure droppable guys. But your depth, as I said in the open, is really going to be tested this week. Your depth is really going to be tested this week because the bye weeks this week are really, really, really going to kill. I don't know about kill, but at least disrupt a lot of fantasy teams' roster, mine included. The bye weeks this week are Green Bay, Chicago, Denver, and Cincinnati. So at quarterback, you're not going to have Aaron Rodgers or Jay Cutler or Peyton Manning or Andy Dalton. And now Peyton Manning is probably droppable in most leagues at this point. I hope by this point he's off a lot of leagues' undroppable lists, because in some leagues he's probably not still on the undroppable list. But now, after the poor production he's had the past few weeks, even in good matchups, suffice it to say, I would not blame you if you drop Peyton Manning. I would honestly not be surprised if you did that in any league. But unless, again, you think he's going to break out at some point. Now, as receivers, Emmanuel Sanders, Demaryius Thomas, they're still safe plays, but it's hard to trust Peyton at this point. So, but not having Rodgers, not having Dalton, two of the top fantasy quarterbacks this year, that's going to be huge for a lot of owners. So, and Cutler tonight has put up 21 points in 3 straight weeks, and I got him off waivers, and he's been a stud for me. So, you're not going to have him this week. Running backs: Eddie Lacy, James Starks, Matt Forte, Ronnie Hillman, Jeremy Hill, and Gio Bernard. You're not going to have these guys. And really, the biggest thing out of that bunch, of course, is Forte, who's normally a consistent fantasy point producer. Gio Bernard has come on strong of late for Cincinnati. Ronnie Hillman has pretty much emerged as the top bat now in Denver ahead of C.J. Anderson. And really, when it comes to Green Bay and Cincinnati, James Starks and Gio Bernard, they're really taking over the head roles. People that invested a first-round draft pick or even a little bit later in Eddie Lacy or Jeremy Hill, you're not getting a good return on your investment at this point. You've got to be frustrated at seeing the low point totals from Eddie Lacy and Jeremy Hill. You've got to be very disappointed in what you're getting out of those two backs. So I say at this point, if you're an Eddie Lacy owner, if James Stark's still out there on the wire, by gosh sakes, grab him, because at this point, you don't know what you're going to get, from Eddie Lacy. If he's still hampered by the ankle injury, then that's why James Starks is out producing him right now. Same with Cincinnati. Right now, Gio Bernard is taking advantage of the matchups, and Jeremy Hill's just not getting the job done. So you've got to monitor that situation. Or if you're a very smart owner and you want to try to pluck these players from the players that own Eddie Lacy or Jeremy Hill, by all means do that too, because hey, it's legal. So it's just crazy about that situation. Wide receivers not going to have this week. Randall Cobb, James Jones, Alshon Jeffrey, Eddie Royal, Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, A.J. Green, and Marvin Jones. All now, unlike the quarterbacks and running backs, all these wide receivers have consistently put up strong wide receiver 1 and 2 numbers. So these are going to be big losses in your lineup this week. You've got to find a way to replace. And tight ends, maybe not as much Richard Rodgers and Green Bay, but Martellus Bennett, and especially Tyler Eifert, who I own in my leagues, I'm not going to have this week. So I had to pick up Charles Clay from Buffalo off waivers, who I think is going to get a lot of targets this week in that matchup in London with Buffalo and Jacksonville, because Tyrod Taylor's going to be out, and Sammy Watkins is not going to play, and Percy Harvin. There's now talk about Percy Harvin is sitting at home, and it's just a rumor. He denied it, but he's potentially contemplating his future retirement because of all these injuries he has. So that means more targets for Robert Woods. That means more targets for Charles Clay. Even though E.J. Manuel is going to be playing at quarterback, Taylor has already been ruled out, by the way. He's going to get targets. So this is a great week. If Charles Clay is out there on your waiver wire and you're missing a Martellus Bennett or a Tyler Eifert, by all means, go get Charles Clay. I mean, I think he's going to be a big dividend for you. So those are the guys you're not going to have this week. Let's dive into these matchups and see who we can trust and who we can't in these matchups this week for your fantasy team. Starting with tonight's game, the Thursday night game between Seattle and San Francisco. Again, I tweeted yesterday my thoughts on this game tonight. This is probably going to be a pretty ugly game. There really aren't a whole lot of elite must-start options, and really the only elite must-start options are from the Seahawks. And that's Russell Wilson, Marshawn Lynch, and Jimmy Graham. And I know you might be surprised at the last name. Like, wait a minute, Jimmy Graham? You're calling Jimmy Graham a must-start now? Well, I think you kind of have to based on what we've seen lately from Jimmy Graham. He is now getting more targets. Remember a couple weeks ago when he complained about not getting the ball enough, not getting targets? Well, now Seattle is starting to utilize that weapon that they have in Jimmy Graham. And last week he had 12 targets, caught 8 of them. So let's hope that that is a sign of things to come. I think you can throw him out there as a low-end tight end 1. I really think he is usable this week. You hope that trend continues. You hope he finds the end zone at least once. I think he's still hoping for a touchdown this year. But, maybe he already has 1. I don't know. But, at least you hope that trend continues. And, Russell Wilson, for me, more of a low-end QB1, but still usable. I'm not going to say it's a must-start because, A, it's on the road, and usually Seattle tends to play a little bit tougher on, it's a little tougher for them on the road than at home. And it's a divisional opponent in San Francisco. And you know San Francisco is going to play hard, even though they probably feel like they're overmatched a little bit. You know they're still going to go, but you probably can't afford to sit Russell Wilson, especially all these quarterbacks on bye. So for me, more of a low-end QB1. Marshawn Lynch, though, he's back to must-start status. Clearly he's healthy again. The hamstring is no longer an issue. Thomas Rawls can be dropped in most leagues. Unless you have room for him as a handcuff, he can be dropped in most leagues. He's back to being that must-start status. The only wide receiver really you can trust on the Seahawks as a risky wide receiver 3 play is Doug Baldwin. Yes, I know occasionally Jermaine Kearse and Ricardo Lockett and even Tyler Lockett get some touchdowns, but they're not consistent enough to be relevant in fantasy. They're really, they're just very, very touchdown-dependent wide receiver 4 or 5s. Doug Baldwin, at least, gets a lot of targets. He does occasionally find the end zone. So he is the most consistent option. So for me, more of a risky wide receiver 3, but really the only usable Seattle receiver you can use. I really don't like any of the 49ers this week as must-start plays. and really the big name kind of San Francisco, Colin Kaepernick. Oh, Kaepernick. He's had 2 great back-to-back weeks. He's had 2 awesome weeks. Cap is back. Yeah! Slow your roll there, okay? Let's pump the brakes on that just a little. Let's pump that a little bit. Yes, he has had 2 good weeks, but they were against just terrible defenses. They were just great matches for Kaepernick to exploit. This is not a good one. Seattle's no pushover, but the kind of thing you kind of take maybe a little bit is if Cam Newton and Carolina could play very well against them last week, you might want to treat Cap as just a risky QB2. But if you're really, really desperate, if you're really desperate and you need a bye week filler, if you don't have, say, an Aaron Rodgers or an Andy Dalton or maybe even a Jay Cutler, you maybe take a shot in the dark on Kaepernick, just see what he can do. But it's very, very risky. So really only in like the deepest of leagues if you're desperate. Maybe in 2 quarterback leagues take a shot at Kaepernick, but he probably won't put up big numbers this week. The running backs, I don't like either. I can't recommend Carlos Hyde or Reggie Bush as solid plays here. Hyde is dealing with a foot issue. Risky play as an RB2. Bush might come back this week. The calf thing has been bothering him for a while. But a very risky play as an RB3 or a flex. Just very, very risky. I don't like either guy. And the wide receivers, Anquan Bolden is more the safer play here over Torrey Smith. They're both very touchdown-dependent guys. But the Legion of Boom is still playing at a high level. Not as high probably as they once were, but still a strong secondary nonetheless. Really, I can't really recommend either guys, even as a wide receiver 3. If you pick one, obviously I think you go with Bolden. As a very low end, maybe wide receiver 4. Smith, more wide receiver 5. It's just a very, very big risk you're taking playing any 49er this week. So just keep that in mind if you have any 49ers on your roster. But if you have no better options, you may have to throw them out there or find somebody on waivers. Let's talk about the 9:30 a.m. game in London on Sunday. Bills and Jaguars, and I gotta say, at least to this standard, why do we keep exposing the Brits to the Jaguars? I mean, we want them to see the best that American football has to offer, and we keep sending the Jaguars to London. I'm not quite sure how that correlates. I don't get it, but whatever. But a lot of fantasy breakdown for this matchup. The big thing with the Bills is, as now as we know, Tyrod Taylor is officially ruled as out. The news came down today. He's officially declared out. The doctors have said that they still need some time for that sprained MCL to heal, so he is officially ruled out. So if you were thinking about Tyrod Taylor coming back this week, I thought about actually at some point. I actually picked him up briefly off waivers this week, thinking, okay, he's going to come back, because everyone said, oh yeah, he's going to come back this week. And then this happened. So then I had to drop Tyrod Taylor. I picked up Brian Hoyer instead, so because he's been playing well of late. So I had to make a last-minute change to my lineup. So Tyrod Taylor out, EJ Manuel in. Maybe again, not a great play. More of a desperate bye week filler. I mean, it's the Jaguars. It's not an elite defense. Maybe yes, they're going to get a couple sacks on EJ Manuel because they're a great sacking unit, but other than that, EJ Manuel's not a great play for me this week. Again, just more of if you're really like a deep league or a 2-quarterback league, a desperate QB2 player bye week filler option, not a great play for me. In terms of running backs, as long as LaShawn McCoy is a full go, you're playing him. I mean, you're playing him as your RB1. He's going to carve up that Jaguars defense as long as he's healthy. So it looks like he's back to being a full go. Just monitor his health this week, as always. But for me, if he plays full go, you throw him out there. So at this point, in terms of the other running backs, you really can't have these guys on your roster unless you want to keep Carlos Williams as a handcuff. He should be able to clear concussion protocol very soon, but at this point, he does not have any more fantasy value. His ship on that has sailed. He's just a handcuff at this point. So if you have room on your bench for him to keep him in case McCoy has a setback again, then great. But otherwise, you can drop Carlos Williams. So then really, again, the big plays are at wide receiver and tight end are Robert Woods and Charles Clay. No Sammy Watkins, no Percy Harvin. So this leads to these guys getting more targets. So, Robert Woods, I think could be a borderline wide receiver 3. I really, maybe even, with upside as a 2, because now he's going to get the majority of the targets. So I think he's at least a solid play. If he's out there on waivers and you're hurting at wide receiver this week with some bye guys, maybe you take a shot on Robert Woods. So definitely an interesting sleeper this week. And I said Charles Clay. I love Charles Clay this week. He continues to get targets no matter who's in the lineup. He continues to get targets and no matter who's a quarterback, because he was getting targets with Manuel last week. So definitely great bye week filler. Strong tight end 2, but definitely with tight end 1 upside based on his recent success. As for the Jags, the big story is the health of actually 2 guys, TJ Yeldon and Allen Robinson. Now, Yeldon, again, is very, very questionable this week with the groin issue. But as long as he, if he goes, he's had double-digit performances in 2 straight weeks. He's getting involved more in the passing game. So that definitely spells fantasy benefit as a strong RB2 if he is healthy. That's if he's a good. You want to monitor his status, especially the Friday practices, see what happens on the injury report there leading up to this week. And it might come down again to a game-time decision like it did last week, because I'm sure many people just scramble to drop TJ Yeldon from their lineups, myself included, because he was hurt. So if TJ Yeldon is out again, then Denard Robinson really only usable as a risky RB3 or flex. This is a very, very tough matchup against that Bills defense. So very, very tough, asking a lot to play any of these Jaguars this week. And then Allen Robinson, he was the other kind of risky option there. Now, x-rays on his leg. He took a shot to the shin last week by a player. The x-rays did come back negative, so that's good. So as long as he plays, still usable as a solid wide receiver 2 or 3. There's going to be opportunities there. It might be garbage time if the Bills get ahead. There's going to be opportunities for Blake Bortles and Allen Robinson to maybe put up some numbers and some points. So certainly usable. Allen Hurns, same thing. You never know which Allen at wide receiver is going to get the score. But you never know which one. But Hurns is usable again. Wide receiver 3, what the heck, dart throw, just to see if he gets the touchdown or not. Bortles for me, again, the possibility for garbage time numbers are there. A risky kind of a low end 2, high end 3, but certainly usable as a bye week filler if you're hurting at the position. And he's had good weeks of late, so the Jags offense actually has looked quite impressive in some games here, especially a couple weeks ago when they played Tampa Bay. So, but this will be a lot to ask for with this tough Buffalo defense. So just keep that in mind if you're considering Blake Bortles. And then Julius Thomas, tight end, made his debut last week. Looked really good. His status for the game, though, is shaky. He did suffer a rib contusion in that game, which that's a lot more painful injury, I think, than say, the hand that cut him out for a couple weeks. So monitor that really closely. But if he does play, I certainly think he's a borderline tight end 1. He's getting targets. He's getting involved now in the offense, which is nice to see. So certainly usable as a decent tight end option if he is healthy and plays. Tampa Bay at Washington, this could be another fun offensive game because, again, these 2 defenses not exactly the best in terms of, as we saw with the Tampa Bay-Jacksonville game. By the way, this is the 1 o'clock start. These now are into the 1 o'clock games. As we saw with the Tampa Bay-Jacksonville game a couple weeks ago, that was an offensive slugfest. And this could be no different considering these 2 defenses are toward the bottom of the league. So I really like a lot of the players in this matchup this week, except for a couple of spots. But Jameis Winston for the Bucs at quarterback, great bye week filler if you're in a pinch. I mean, now the big risk with Jameis Winston is he has to cut down on the turnovers. That's really the big bugaboo for Jameis Winston right now. He threw 4 picks against Jacksonville a couple weeks ago. So he's got to really cut it down. So he's right now more of a low-end QB2 or a bye week filler if you're really, really desperate. So, but because he's got talent. Jameis Winston has talent around him. He's got playmakers there that can really be effective, but he just has to make use of them and cut down on the interceptions. I love the Tampa Bay running backs. I love the Tampa Bay running backs. I'm very, very high on these guys this week. Doug Martin, and I picked up Charles Sims off waivers in my league. Again, he's starting to become this dual threat back that I really, really like that's used on passing downs. He's had double-digit weeks, like 3 straight weeks now. He's really, really getting involved. But Doug Martin is going to be the guy that's going to get, again, the bulk of the carries. Another great matchup for him to exploit. Put in Doug Martin as your RB2 with RB1 upside and really reap the benefits because he is going to take advantage of this matchup, hopefully. There's been some times where he hasn't taken advantage of good matchups. Last season was a prime example. But just reap the benefits from that. And Sims, definitely usable in PPR leagues as a strong RB2 or flex, but even in standard leagues as I'm playing him now, I'm starting him this week. There's value there with him. Back-to-back double-digit performances. Okay, I said 3 straight weeks, it was 2. But back to back, so there is value there with Charles Sims getting him involved in the passing game. So I really like Charles Sims this week. I like the receivers. Mike Evans, Vincent Jackson. I mean, again, the talent is there with these guys. Now, Jameis Winston trying to still develop his rapport with Mike Evans a little bit, but I think it's going to get better. You can't give up on Mike Evans yet. It's still a long season to go. He'll be locked into his target as the season goes on. Very usable here. Strong wide receiver 2 play this week. I'm really, really high on him. Same with Vincent Jackson. And Vincent Jackson, his targets and value are very limited by, Winston's turnovers and Evans' targets and game flow and all of that. And I mentioned that on here before. But he's still usable as definitely a strong wide receiver 3, especially with this plus matchup. So I really, really like that. As for the tight end, now there were reports that Austin Seferian-Jenkins may return this week from the shoulder issue, but that doesn't seem to be the case. I've heard nothing official yet on that. You want to monitor that going forward. If you have the room, you continue to keep him benched if you're holding out hope that he goes on. But until we see him back at a normal level, if he does go, more of a risky tight end too. But in all likelihood, he probably isn't going to go this week. So just keep that in mind. Monitor that situation moving forward. If he gets back out there, obviously he'll be a huge fantasy asset. He was in the first several weeks of the season. As for Washington, Kirk Cousins, there was a story I read online that Kirk Cousins, some people thought Kirk Cousins was going to get benched in favor of either Colt McCoy or RG3. I know, shocker. I was actually shocked reading that. I think Kirk Cousins, while it's not pretty, he directs the offense a lot better than I think those two ever could. So, but the rumor, Jay Gruden I think said that was unfounded. It wasn't true. Cousins is still the starter, and if Cousins cannot exploit this matchup, I don't know why he should be the quarterback. So he needs to take advantage of this good matchup. So here, a strong QB2, or again, a bye week filler if you don't have Rodgers or Dalton. I think you can use them as a filler for this week, considering the plus matchup. Deshaun Jackson's already been ruled out with the hamstring issue at wide receiver. So again, Pierre Garçon, the young Jamison Crowder are going to get more targets this week. I like both those guys as wide receiver 3s with upside. Maybe Garçon just a little bit more because, again, I think he's a more reliable option. But the team is really high on this Jamison Crowder from Duke. He is really kind of like Stephon Diggs in Minnesota last week, the rookie out of Texas Tech. They're both breaking out and having really good games. Very, very high on him. So I like both I think are usable as wide receiver 3s with Deshaun Jackson out. But Garçon maybe just a couple spots higher because he's been more reliable. But boy, Jamison Crowder could be a really, really deep sleeper moving forward if he continues to get targets at the rate that he is. And then the tight end wise now, Jordan Reed has been practicing. I was thinking he was going to be out with the concussion issue that he's still going through, but he has been practicing this week, so he might be back this week. So if Jordan Reed does go, I think you can use him as a tight end 2 with upside this week as well, or definitely a bye week filler. But Derek Carrier, I don't think you can afford to play him if Reed's out. Reed's a more reliable option, so I don't think you can take that route if he is out. Atlanta at Tennessee. Your Falcons this week are starts of the week. I mean, this is probably as pretty of a matchup as it's going to get. Marcus Mariota, in all likelihood, is leaning to probably being out for this week. The sprained MCL, the same injury that befell Tyrod Taylor, is usually a 1 to 2 week issue, or depending on the severity of the injury. He is getting limited work in practice this week, but it's something we want to monitor up until Friday to see if he's in for sure. But in all likelihood, it's going to be Zach Mettenberger at quarterback, and that's not exactly pretty news for Tennessee. So you'll want to start your Atlanta defense could be a sneaky streaming option this week, considering this really good matchup. You're starting your main 3 guys. Really, the only Falcons you can trust at this point are the main 3 trio of Matt Ryan, Devontae Freeman, and Julio Jones. You're starting those 3 on a weekly basis every single week until further notice. They are just locked in, solid ones every single week. Because, again, this offense has just been insane this year. This is a plus matchup. Even though it's on the road, they're going to make something happen. So at this point, I don't think you could really trust the other receivers like Leonard Hankerson or Roddy White. I mean, just too inconsistent for my liking. Leonard Hankerson has been a disappointment. Back-to-back single-point weeks. Very, very risky. I can't really recommend as wide receiver 3. More of a wide receiver 4 if your league goes that deep. I just think it's a risk. Same with Roddy White. So there are times when he'll get back in it and other times he'll fall back to earth. So just too inconsistent for my liking. Again, the only rock solid 3 of Atlanta are Ryan, Freeman, Jones. For Tennessee, there's really no one that I can recommend this week. Again, obviously, I mean, if Mariota plays, then maybe you plug him in as a QB2. But it's a big risk considering that tough Atlanta defense. But you cannot play, Zach Mettenberger against Atlanta. You just can't do it. It's too big a risk. You're not playing anybody in the Titans' backfield, as I said, because right now there's no clear number 1 option. No, I'm hoping that when David Cobb gets healthy, he takes advantage of that and he becomes the top option in Tennessee, because I like what I see out of the rookie from Minnesota, especially what I saw in the preseason. I think eventually he could become the top option. So if you want like a speculative ad at running back, and if he's out there on your waiver, if you have room on your bench, go get David Cobb, because I think he's eventually going to be the top option. It's not going to be Bishop Sankey. He sucks. It's not going to be Antonio Andrews. He sucks. So I think it's going to be David Cobb. So just if you have room on your bench to stash somebody for a while, go get David Cobb. As for Kendall Wright, a dart throw wide receiver 3. If Mariota's out, he's a big time risk. So just very, very risky. And again, Delaney Walker, a tight end worth using as a tight end 2 or a bye week filler. I think either way, but again, very risky if Mariota's out. So your Falcons are the ones you want to start, not as much Tennessee. Shootout of the week is going to be New Orleans and Indianapolis. I mean, come on now. I mean, we know that these are two very, number 1, offensive-minded teams, 2 very good quarterbacks in Drew Brees and Andrew Luck. And number 2, the defenses aren't exactly up to snuff. I mean, so, and it's indoors in a dome where New Orleans is used to playing and the Colts are pretty good at too. So this is going to be a fun shootout game. I like a lot of guys in this matchup. I think certainly the main 3 of New Orleans you can start. I'm talking Drew Brees, Mark Ingram, and even Willie Snead. I mean, I think, Snead is the major benefactor right now as Drew Brees' top target outside of, by the way, tight end Ben Watson. And I mentioned him last week. Where did that come from? I mean, seriously, that just all of a sudden breaking out, leapfrogging Josh Hill to be the top tight end in New Orleans. I mean, where did that come from? I mean, and Ben Watson is like, how long has he been in the league? I mean, like what, 12 plus years, something like that. He's been in the league a long time. I remember when he was a Patriot, for gosh sake. But that just came out of nowhere. But Breeze, you can't sit him in this matchup. It's too good a matchup. Mark Ingram, the Colts run defense and the dregs of the NFL. Mark Ingram should have a buku week this week. You're rock solid RB1. You're starting him. And Willie Snead, strong wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside. Definitely usable this week. I think you'll reap the benefits from having Willie Snead in your lineup as well. As for the other wide receivers, Brandon Cooks and again Brandon Coleman, they're both very touchdown dependent. I don't really like either guy. But you could do worse as a wide receiver 3, especially in a shootout like this. Cooks is certainly usable. I'm not fond of Coleman. He didn't get enough targets. But Cooks is certainly usable as a wide receiver 3. In this game. Maybe he gets a touchdown. So certainly one you can put into your lineups. And with Watson, I don't know if he'll do what he did every single week, but if you're hurting this week at tight end, to say if you don't have Martellus Bennett or Tyler Eifert, if he's out there in your league, take a flyer on him as a tight end 2 and see what happens. See if that production and consistency continues. As for the Colts, again, I like the main 3 this week. That's Andrew Luck, Frank Gore, T.Y. Hilton. I think those 3, again, should be in your lineups. As the Saints secondary, nothing special, nothing to sneeze at. As long as Luck is back being healthy, he's his QB1 self again. He should be in lineups. You roll him out here this week. Frank Gore, yes, the Colts did re-sign Ahmad Bradshaw back, but there's really no need to panic if you're a Frank Gore owner for that. He's just a handcuff. He only comes in on certain down situations. So, There's nothing about nothing about that. Still a solid RB2 with upside. T.Y. Hilton again, solid wide receiver 1. And remember, folks, what the T.Y. stands for. The T.Y. stands for thank you. Dante Moncrief, there's a chance he could find the end zone this week. I have him like a 3.5 star out of 5. There's a chance, certainly. He's a usable wide receiver 3 if you don't have better options out there. He's certainly a usable position at that spot to see if he gets a touchdown. Again, I think this game's going to be a shootout, so he's certainly a usable option. But for me, the guys you're not going to use in this game, Andre Johnson. Apparently that revenge game was just a 1-week hit, wonder, fluke, whatever it was. It was just a one-off thing. He disappeared again last week. Nothing more than wide receiver 4 waiver wire fodder, really, because apparently with Matt Hasselbeck preferred him more than Andrew Luck did. As I mentioned last week, I mentioned about quarterbacks preferring certain wide receivers. Well, Andrew Luck prefers T.Y. Hilton and Dante Moncrief and Philip Dorsett even to Andre Johnson. So you can't afford playing him. And the tight ends, Kobe Fleener, Dwayne Allen, again, 0. There's no consistency between the two enough. They both are out there sometimes at the same time on the field. Not enough fantasy relevance between the two. Oh, and by the way, Colts. Colts, come here. Yeah, come here, Colts. Come here, Colts. What the heck were you thinking? What the heck were you thinking running that whatever you whatchamacallit on 4th and 3? What even do you call that formation? What do you? I'm watching that at home like. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, McAfee's over here, and there's 2 guys here, and there's 2 Patriot guys behind them. What are they going to do if they snap it? They're going to get destroyed, and that's exactly what happened. What are you doing? You're playing New England. You're playing them close at home, and you try to pull some fake punterooski brewski stuff like this. Apparently you were on brewski or something. That's what I'm going to call it. The brewski punt play, because you were clearly on beer or drunk or something, because I knew that play was going to fail right from the start. I'm watching this going, what the heck are they doing? What the heck are they doing? And I knew it was going to fail. So it's like, oh my gosh. That blew the game. It caused them to lose the game. Don't ever try that again. Don't ever do that again. Oh, I couldn't believe when I saw that. Couldn't believe it. Okay, Minnesota at Detroit. This could be interesting. Detroit found an offense last week. Matthew Stafford had a breakout game, as did Megatron Calvin Johnson. Minnesota didn't look pretty last week, but again, they were playing Kansas City in a tough matchup. This is a better matchup all around. So this, again, could also be the makings of a very much a shootout game. Your must-starts for the Vikings, really, the only one is Adrian Peterson. I mean, he's matchup-proof. You're starting him. He did have a rough week last week against Kansas City. He was held to like 60 yards rushing, but again, tough defense on the road. You usually have a huge bounce back week this week. You start AP with confidence. Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback. Yes, Teddy Bridgewater found the new breakout wide receiver in Stephon Diggs, but here's the thing. I don't think it's going to really change the game plan all that much. I still think they're going to focus around Adrian Peterson. This matchup screams as a must-start because the Lions' defense has been beat up and torn apart this year, but I don't think so. I think Bridgewater, maybe a desperate bye-week filler as a QB3, but really nothing more than that because, again, how many times are you going to throw the football? So that to me is just the risk. As for Stephon Diggs, who apparently has emerged as a number 1 receiver in Minnesota, here's the thing. With the fact that the Vikes are playing so conservative, you can't really trust him as anything more than like a high-upside wide receiver 3. And certainly you can pick him up off waivers and use him, but very, very, very risky. See if he breaks, see if this consistency continues. High upside wide receiver 3, you can certainly use him. But, again, it's kind of a throw in the dart at this point to see if that wasn't just a 1-week fluke or a trend going forward. Especially if Charles Johnson continues to be out. And Mike Wallace continues to struggle, which I only have him as a dart throw wide receiver 3 or 4 because, again, he's not getting the targets. And again, Kyle Rudolph at tight end, not getting enough looks to warrant fantasy relevance, so not even recommended. Now, as for the Lions, Matthew Stafford had the big game last week, over 400 yards, 4 touchdowns, led the team in the first win of the season against Chicago. Not quite ready to call him just fully back just yet. More of a low-end QB1 or high-end 2, but still very usable if you're in a pinch. If you don't have Aaron Rodgers, if you don't have Cutler, if you don't have Dalton, he's very usable. I think this will be a little bit a tougher challenge, but certainly I think the opportunity is there to get points. Again, he's targeting Calvin Johnson now. He's getting him involved. So I think certainly you can use him moving forward. And still just very, very usable in a pinch. Now, running back situation, the preferred option here is Theo Riddick. Again, with Amir Abdullah right now struggling in the fumble doghouse, getting benched last week for that, you just can't trust him at this point. You might not be able to afford to drop him at this point, but I said you can in some leagues. But right now Theo Riddick is the Lions back to own if you wish to own one. Worth a shot as an RB3 or flex, especially in PPR leagues, because again he's that dual threat running back. And maybe even the team will give him carries if Abdullah isn't too much in the doghouse. So we'll see what happens. But I can't recommend Abdullah right now. Calvin Johnson, you play him. I mean, again, the breakout game last week. Hopefully that's a sign of things to come. Hopefully Stafford will continue targeting him going forward and hopefully making the big plays. So maybe he's back to his old self. So you put him in going forward. Golden Tate, very much was gifted the touchdown last week. Incompetent refs, blah blah blah. With the call that was it a touchdown? Was it not? Do we really know what a touchdown is anymore? Like Chicago should write a new song. Does anybody really know what a touchdown is? I mean, really? I mean, that's do we really even know? I mean, that's really what it's come to at this point. So. But other than that, risky wide receiver 2 or 3 play if he's very touchdown dependent, but he's getting some targets. But if John's continuing to be the main focus, then he's going to take that off of Golden Tate. So very risky there. Pittsburgh at Kansas City. The big story out of this game is who's going to be at quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And all signs are pointing to that it's going to be Landry Jones again this week. Big Ben... said he's looked good. He felt good of late, but it looks like week 8 is looking like more of his return day at this point. And Mike Vick, the hamstring, he's got a tear in his hamstring. He revealed that yesterday. So he will probably be out for some considerable time. So it looks like Landry Jones is going to be the guy. Again, monitor going forward, see what the practice report says and the injury report says on Friday before committing anything to any Steeler quarterback. But it looks like for now, Landry Jones is the guy. But going up against this Chiefs tough defense who just really put Minnesota in check, especially again, you're going on the road, you're playing in Kansas City, very loud Arrowhead Stadium. I can't really recommend Landry Jones, not even as a bye week filler option. It's very, very risky play. He did look good with the Steelers offense, but boy, that's really, you're taking a big, big risk in this tough matchup if you throw Landry Jones out there. So just keep that in mind. Now, if Ben does come back this week, then I think, yeah, you could maybe use him as a QB2 or a bye week filler option. But if it's Landry Jones, I don't think I would want to trust that against that tough Kansas City defense. So really the only guy really that you can solidly start is Le'Veon Bell. I mean, because again, he's matchup proof. The Chiefs, yes, they did just held Adrian Peterson in check, but you cannot afford to sit Le'Veon Bell regardless of that. You can't afford to sit him. He's just too good. Antonio Brown has really, really struggled with Ben Roethlisberger out. He's getting less targets. He's getting less, which leads to less yardage, which leads to probably, I don't think he's even had a touchdown during this time that Big Ben is out. So, again, it's a bit of a concern. And, again, you're really, really disappointed as an owner if you have Antonio Brown and you're relying on him for that wide receiver 1 production every single week, and you're not getting it right now because Big Ben has been out. But again, I don't think you can afford to sit Antonio Brown even in this matchup. I still think you can play him, but he's not a must-start option this week. He's more of a wide receiver 2 because, again, but maybe Landry Jones will make an effort to get him the ball. Maybe, or he'll continue to prefer Martavis Bryant. We don't know. Speaking of Martavis Bryant, you can play if Landry Jones is playing this week, you can maybe play him as your wide receiver 3 because again, had 2 touchdowns last week. Was that a 1-week fluke, or is that the trend we're going to see going forward, even if Big Ben comes back? So you really got to kind of weigh these two guys. You know, does Landry Jones just prefer Martavis Bryant to Antonio Brown, or is he going to try to get Brown the ball this week and then limit Bryant's production? How do you weigh these guys based on the quarterback situation? So it's very, very tricky, but I think both guys are usable and can be in lineups this week, but just be aware that, you know, with whoever it is at quarterback, one might prefer one option to the other. But both guys, I think, still certainly usable in this matchup. Except for Marcus Wheaton. You know, Marcus Wheaton is a deep ball, one-off threat. He's nothing more than a wide receiver 4 or 5. With the emergence, you know, with Bryant back and Brown still the main guy, he's just too much of a risky play for me. So can't recommend him. And again, tight end Heath Miller, you know, one of the stronger tight end 2s, but again, he's been disappointing with Big Ben out. He's only had like 5 points over the total games that they've been out. That's really disgusting. So can't really recommend him as a must-start player, even a bye-week filler option for you, because again, if Landry Jones plays, he's not going to get a lot of targets, it looks like. Chiefs, the only Chief you can probably really trust at this point is Travis Kelce at tight end, because the Chiefs without Jamal Charles are clearly a mess. I mean, as we saw last week, now it might have been a byproduct of the tough matchup with Minnesota, but clearly the offense looked a lot different. It was the same thing a couple years ago. It was the same situation when they lost Jamal Charles for the year. The offense became a hot mess. And it looks like we're in that same boat again with these players right now. And the fact that there's players banged up outside of Jamal Charles. Jeremy Maclin has a concussion, and he might not play this week. Now, signs are pointing up to him potentially playing. He's practicing, so that's looking good. But if he plays, to me, nothing more than a what-the-heck wide receiver 3 or 4. With this Chiefs offense kind of stuck in neutral the way it is, and the Pittsburgh defense always seeming to play tough. It's just a shot in the dark. So very, very risky play. Again, so Travis Kelce to me is the only sure thing. He's your tight end 1. You can play him. If they get in the red zone, they're going to look his way. So you go with that. I can't even trust Alex Smith as a bye-week filler. I really can't at this point. It's just way too risky. I just can't do it. You know what Alex Smith is. He's a dink and dunk guy. If he doesn't have Jeremy Maclin, that's what he's really going to be, because then he has no deep ball threat. So very, very risky. Can't trust him. And the running back situation, boy, what a mess that was last week. And Charcandrick West, I said last week, remember the name. Well, you might want to forget it quickly after that 1 week, because neither him nor Nile Davis really did anything to separate each other from who should be the lead dog in Kansas City. They were both, and again, might have been the byproduct of the tough match with Minnesota, but really neither did anything to stand out. If you trust one, obviously, again, it would be West if you're leaning on him. Both these guys are right now just mainly flex plays, risky RB3 flex plays. But if you lean on one, it's probably going to be West. See what happens for one more week. And if they don't produce this week, then certainly both guys, maybe Davis for sure, but maybe, West, hold on to him. Maybe if you have room on your bench in a deep league, just see if he breaks out, are droppable guys. So, as they go, the Kansas City offense goes at this point. So will one emerge? Time will tell. Cleveland at St. Louis. Your starts of the week here really are Gary Barnidge, the tight end from Cleveland. He's emerged as a rock-solid tight end 1 going forward. He's the safest receiving threat the team has. You're definitely starting him. And Todd Gurley of St. Louis. I mean, my gosh, if you drafted Todd Gurley and had him sitting on your bench for a few weeks because he was still out with the knee issue, and look, you've got an RB1 now, okay? You've got a rock-solid RB1 for the rest of the year as long as he stays healthy. My gosh, Gurley has just been destroying teams this year, and I think he's going to get a lot of work again because Cleveland, one of the worst rushing defenses in the NFL. So he's a must-start until proven otherwise. Those are your 2 best bets this week. I can't really recommend the quarterbacks, neither Josh McCown nor Nick Foles. Very, very risky. Can't can't even recommend Foles really as a bye-week filler. They don't have any strong receiving options outside of Tavon Austin. And even Austin is a risky wide receiver 3, play if you dare kind of thing, because he does get targets. He is very valuable in the in the passing game and the special teams game. He even sometimes gets handoffs on runs, but I don't know if that'll happen now that Gurley's toting the rock as much as he is. But occasionally they throw Austin out there to make a run. But very, very risky. I don't really like either of them. McCown is again a risky, very, very risky QB3. That Rams pass rush is just nasty. Another tough matchup. The fun was fun while it lasted for Josh McCown, but he's playing a tough schedule the rest of the way. So I can't even recommend him as a bye-week filler either. The running backs for Cleveland, Isaiah Crowell, Duke Johnson. I prefer Crowell only by a little bit, though. He's more of an RB3 for this matchup. Johnson, better playing PPR leagues, but not even really worth a look as an RB3 in standard because of this tough matchup. And Travis Benjamin, risky wide receiver 3, but again, outside of Gary Barnidge, he is the safest receiving option that the Browns actually have. So he's certainly usable in that regard, but again, very, very big risk because of the tough matchup with the Rams. Houston and Miami. This could be a fun matchup too for some fantasy points because again, not exactly great defenses here. Although Miami did look really strong against Tennessee last week. Although again, anyone could look good against Tennessee. So is this a sign that the Dolphins are back now under Dan Campbell, or is that a 1-week write-off? We shall see this week. But I like a lot of the fantasy players in this game. I like the main 3 for Miami. I'm talking Ryan Tannehill, Lamar Miller, Jarvis Landry. I think all 3 of those guys can be in your lineups this week as startable guys. Tannehill, great bye-week fill-in, solid QB2 with QB1 upside, especially Lamar Miller had the breakout week last week. Again, strong RB2 with RB1 upside moving forward. And Jarvis Landry, clearly the top option in Miami, should be in your lineup as a strong wide receiver 2. As for the Texans, I just mentioned, I picked up Brian Hoyer off waivers. Brian Hoyer has had actually, I think, like 3 straight weeks of double-digit fantasy production. When you have a reliable wide receiver like DeAndre Hopkins to throw to, it really helps your fantasy numbers. So I think I think Hoyer's certainly usable as a bye-week filler option for guys that are on bye. Not a recommended play here, but again, if you're in a pinch, if you're desperate like me, because I don't have Jay Cutler this week, then I think you can certainly plug him in and use him for this matchup. And again, Arian Foster, DeAndre Hopkins, you're starting these 2 every single week. Rock solid RB1 and wide receiver 1 every single week. Jets at New England. I like a lot of guys in this matchup too. This should be a fun game as well. I think you're going to reap a lot of fantasy points from this matchup as well. If you have these guys, Chris Ivory, Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker, you're starting those guys for the Jets. Ivory at this point must start status in RB1. He's gone off for weeks now. He's clearly the top option there in that Jets backfield, and you're reaping the benefits if you have him. So definitely a must start there. Brandon Marshall. I mean, the Pats secondary is going to try to key in on Brandon Marshall, but you can't afford to sit him. High-end wide receiver 2. And Eric Decker, yeah, the fumble he lost last week, that might have hurt a lot of owners, but he still gets enough targets in this offense to warrant fantasy value. He's one of the more rock-solid wide receiver 3s, especially this week, so I think you can go with him. Ryan Fitzpatrick, the Jets could be playing from behind in this game, so the opportunity is there for Fitzpatrick to get garbage yardage, and that counts. So a solid QB2 with upside, great bye-week filler for you. Patriots, I think you can start actually anybody. I think you can start anybody on this roster now, considering what Danny Amendola did last week as a wide receiver. I think you can start any of these guys this week. Obviously you're starting Tom Brady, you're starting Julian Edelman, you're starting Rob Gronkowski. I mean, those 3 are rock solid every single week. But you can start either running back. I think you can start Deion Lewis or LeGarrette Blount. Lewis should get back to having a bigger workload. He seeded to LeGarrette Blount last week in the Colts game, but you never know with Belichick. But certainly, you think you got to have him in your lineup as at least an RB2. Same with Blount, RB2 or flex at the very least. I think either way. And Amendola is usable. I think as a wide receiver 3 with upside after the breakout game he had last week. I think if he gets continually more involved, I think For now, you can use him as long as Brandon LaFell is out. Now, of course, there are reports that LaFell may come back as soon as this week, but I think in all likelihood he's not going to be back this week. Now, he could come back next week. So if you want a speculative ad moving forward that you can potentially stash if he's out there in your league, then Brandon LaFell is someone, if you're in a boosted wide receiver, that you can stash on your wire now and then reap the benefits later, because anyone in the New England offense is a plus. So, but for now, as long as LaFell is out, then Amendola is going to reap the benefits, and he's going to be a solid fantasy play for you. The later afternoon games, Oakland at San Diego. The big question in this game is the health of Keenan Allen. As myself, a Keenan Allen owner, I really need to know. But from, it was diagnosed as a hip flexor sprain, not a big issue. So they're hoping he can play this week, but he did not practice yesterday. So a bit of a concern there with Keenan Allen. Again, something to monitor as the week goes on. So just keep that in mind if you're a Keenan Allen owner like myself. But as long as he plays, he's been a beast. So put him in there as your wide receiver, at least wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside. If Allen were to miss any time, Malcolm Floyd, Dontrell Inman, especially Antonio Gates, they would be the biggest benefits. If you're starting a San Diego running back, it's Danny Woodhead. I mean, at this point, maybe even Brandon Oliver thrown there as a flex, but Melvin Gordon's clearly in the doghouse with the fumbling issue. You can't afford, to play him at this point. You can't afford to start him. You might bench him, or even drop him, but you can't afford to play him at this point until he really starts overcoming that. DW is one of my favorite players on the team. I love his upside every single week. Solid RB2, but this week, if he's going to get more touches, solid RB1 upside. And then Antonio Gates, you're playing Antonio Gates. He's back to must-start tight end 1, so you're playing him this week as well. And the Raiders, as we know, have been a joke, an absolute joke against tight ends this year. And like I said, you're playing Phillip Rivers also. Should pick apart the Raiders' defense as well. Dang, got it, man. Yeah, you're playing Phillip Rivers. Heck yeah. As for the Raiders, I think you can use any of the major 3 this week. I'm talking Derek Carr, Latavius Murray, and Amari Cooper. Carr, I really like him as a bye-week filler. I think, San Diego's secondary isn't exactly strong. Carr's not getting blitzed, he's getting better protection. He's not getting sacked as often as he was. And I think he continues to really improve each week. So, again, more of a low-end QB2. Latavius Murray, still a solid RB2 that can put up RB1 numbers potentially, so I like him here in this matchup as well. Amari Cooper has proven he's a must-start till proven otherwise because, again, he's the main option there. But Michael Crabtree, as I mentioned, is also getting some decent looks that he could be potentially usable as a wide receiver 4 with maybe even wide receiver 3 upside. If you're in a pinch at wide receiver, you may plug in Michael Crabtree because he's getting a lot more targeted recently as well too. So, and just keep that in mind. Dallas at the Giants. The Giants really are the better plays here this week. Eli Manning, may not have all of his receivers healthy again with Victor Cruz being out for a while, Odell Beckham battling the hamstring. But going up against this banged-up Dallas secondary, you can't afford to sit Eli Manning. You're starting him this week as you normally would. You're starting Odell Beckham as long as he plays and he's healthy. Rashad Jennings, the running back situation with Rashad Jennings and Shane Vereen, I think they're both usable, but Vereen more or less in PPR leagues, kind of a risky RB3 in standard leagues or a flex play, but he's one of the more safer flex plays because of his value in the passing game. Jennings, more of an RB2 or a flex, but again, kind of a risk each week with the fact that, Vereen's getting more targets and Andre Williams being used at the goal line occasionally, so kind of a risk there, but still certainly usable. And Ruben Randall, decent wide receiver 3 play. He's really benefiting in the fact that Victor Cruz has been out for as long as he has been. And we still don't know when Cruz is going to come back anytime soon, so just keep that in mind. But Randall, decent wide receiver 3 as long as Victor Cruz is out. I really, can't recommend any Cowboys because, again, the Cowboys are in a period of transition right now. No longer Brandon Whedon at quarterback, it's Matt Castle. No longer Joseph Randall or Darren McFadden at running back, it's Christine Michael. So they're committing to these new guys. So it's very, very risky. especially against the salty Giants defense on the road. You're not really playing these guys. Maybe Michael is a desperate flex, but you really can't really afford to plug him in right away until we see some actual work from Christine Michael. And Terrence Williams, I can't really even recommend him as a wide receiver 3 until we really see what Castle brings to the table when it comes to fantasy purposes. So just keep that in mind. If they still use McFadden on passing downs, then maybe you can play him, as maybe a flex play, but only as a flex play. Then the Sunday night game, Philadelphia at Carolina. I really like a lot of options this week. I think this could be another one of those offensive shootout games. We could see a lot of offensive shootouts this week, it's looking like, by the way. I really, really think this game has a lot of potential. I like a lot of guys in this matchup. Bradford, quarterbacks. Bradford is a risky QB2, but still really usable if you're in a pinch at quarterback again. If you have one of those guys that are on the bye week, like Rodgers or Dalton, I think certainly is usable. But Cam Newton is a safe play as they count. If he can play that well against Seattle, then imagine what he's going to do going forward. So certainly Cam Newton is usable moving forward. You're definitely not sitting him going forward. Running backs, I think DeMarco Murray, the Carolina defense, it's going to give him a little bit of a challenge, but I think he looks strong again. So I think he's, again, getting involved again. I think you can use him as a solid low-end QB1. Jonathan Stewart, risky RB2 or flex play, more of an RB3 until he really shows some more consistency. It was nice to see him score the 2 touchdowns against Seattle last week, finally not losing goal line carries to Mike freaking Tolbert, fantasy vulture extraordinaire. But, just risky until really we see some consistency from Jonathan Stewart. I picked him up off waivers just for depth. Hopefully we see some consistency in him moving forward. But yeah, more of an RB3 till he shows that consistency. Ryan Matthews, is only a desperate RB3 or flex. He does have value because of his role in the backfield, but very, very risky play against this tough defensive unit. The wide receivers, really the only Eagle you can sort of trust is Jordan Matthews. You don't want to give up on him just yet. I mean, yes, the wide receivers have been very much a mix of this year of, guys, Josh Huff, Riley Cooper, Miles Austin getting involved. But, Matthews, I think, will still be the main guy. Risky wide receiver 2 or 3 at this point, but you don't want to give up on him yet. I still think the potential is there for him to break out. But for now, kind of a risky play. And Ted Ginn, he is the top receiving option in Carolina right now. Ted Ginn has had back-to-back double-digit weeks. So I think, Seattle did shut him down the week prior, I think. Ginn had 2 good weeks before the Seattle game. My bad. He had 2 good weeks before the Seattle game, and then Seattle kind of slowed him down last week. But I think this would be a better chance for him. Bit of a risk as a wide receiver 3, but you could do worse than have Ted Ginn in your lineup. Certainly, he could score this week as well. And Greg Olsen, of course, is an obvious must-start. Scored the game-winning touchdown against Seattle last week. He is one of Cam Newton's major targets. And finally, the Monday night game, Baltimore at Arizona on Monday night. I think this could be a big game for the Cardinals because, again, Baltimore's defense, especially their pass defense, very, very forgiving. So this is a week you start Carson Palmer, you start Larry Fitzgerald, and John Brown, who had a career game last week, who I got off of waivers, and I'm reaping those benefits major. Michael Floyd, Floyd did have a touchdown last week, but is he really back? Time will tell on that. You can treat him again as a borderline wide receiver 2 or 3, but just see these scores again. If you're a really desperate wide receiver, see what happens with him. But for now, it's Fitz and Brown that have been reaping the most benefits from Carson Palmer. And then you can definitely start Chris Johnson, I think. Chris Johnson at running back, strong RB2 or flex for at least the rest of the year. I'm not really worried right now about Andre Ellington or David Johnson stealing a lot of thunder from him. Maybe they vulture a touchdown every once in a while on like a passing play or whatever. Excuse me, but oh man, excuse I. But definitely, either guy might get a touchdown once in a while. But for now, Chris Johnson is the safer running back play. As for the Ravens, again, I like all 3 of your guys here. Joe Flacco, sort of. The card secondary, though, is going to really be a tough matchup for Flacco here. You know, he's a very, very risky, I'd say more of a QB3 than a QB2. I can't really recommend as a QB2. Deep leagues, you might take a chance or a bye-week filler if you're desperate, but I can't recommend as a must-play. Justin Forsett, bit of a bust alert, but again, you probably can't afford to sit him as your RB2. You're probably going to use him in this matchup as well. And Steve Smith. Steve Smith is back. You know how old Steve Smith is? He's 250. But you know what? Doesn't play like it. Back from the back injury, back in the Baltimore groove, as I wrote here. No, I'm serious. I wrote it right there. Back in the Baltimore groove. I don't know why I even wrote that, but he's back in your lineup as a strong wide receiver 3 as long as he's healthy and usable. And Crockett Gilmore, very risky as a tight end too. I just really haven't seen enough from him to very much warrant strong fantasy value. All right. So, guys, that is it. That is a wrap for the Week 7 preview. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, for subscribing, for following along on Twitter. You guys are awesome. You guys know that. If you guys have any dilemmas at all, any positions, especially considering this very, very tough week when some studs are on a bye, please feel free to hit up the comment box below or even on the discussion page on my channel. As always, I check my Gmail up to Sunday to see if you guys have any problems, so feel free to hit up, and I will answer as many questions as I possibly can. Thank you guys again for watching, and don't forget again to tune in again next week when we preview the Week 8 edition on Halloween week. Ooh, spooky. Hopefully it won't be spooky for your fantasy team. Go get a win in Week 7, guys. Good luck, and see y'all next week on the Fantasy Football Stock Report for your team, your league, your game, your home. Good luck, guys.